Viewers, welcome to the Personal Injury Law Show. This is a show that talks about everything current in the law of personal injuries today. My name's Tony Carbone. I'm a personal injury lawyer of over 25 years' experience. With me today I've got Nunzio Tartaglia, a partner in a law firm in insurance law. Good evening, Nunz.
Tony, viewers, welcome.
And also Dr. Beth Wilson, the outgoing Health Services Commissioner, 15 plus years in a role. Good evening, Beth.
Good evening, Tony.
I think you deserve a medal after all those years, Beth. I mean, the role was created in 1987 and you're the only one that's lasted more than one term.
I lasted for 3 terms and a little bit extra, so it was a record, Tony.
Okay. And tonight, viewers, are going to be talking about medical negligence and also patient complaints and the interaction with women. Now, Beth, tell us a bit about the role of the Health Services Commissioner.
Okay. The role of the Health Services Commissioner is to receive and to hopefully resolve complaints from patients when they're not happy with the health service that they've received in the state of Victoria. So the Commissioner can receive complaints about doctors, dentists, nurses, all of the registered professionals, of whom there are 12 groups, but also about people who offer health services who may in fact not be registered at all.
Nunzio, in your role as a lawyer, you get a lot of people that come in saying, I've been mistreated or I believe there's medical negligence. Have you seen fit or had cause to refer them off to the Commissioner?
Of course, look, at times, you see a lot of unfortunately injured clients, through potential medical negligence who are, feel hurt by the doctor and what they've suffered. And, sometimes part of our advice is, look, make a complaint with the Health Service Commission because, they want to, I suppose, make the doctor answerable and tell their side of the story. And I suppose, Doctor, can you explain to the viewers what exactly happens in the process in the sense of, does the plaintiff or the injured party, do they say their side of the story? Then does the doctor put their side of the story in writing? How does it all sort of work out?
Okay, well, first of all, it will depend on what the complaint is about. If the complaint is about a registered practitioner, let's say for our purposes tonight, a doctor, then the Commissioner will make a decision about, does this involve unprofessional or professional misconduct? So if there's an allegation that the doctor has behaved unprofessionally, then it will almost certainly be referred across to the medical board to be dealt with. If the patient is after an explanation, an apology, perhaps a small amount of compensation, then that would stay with the Commissioner. Explanations are incredibly powerful for people in getting their complaints resolved, as are a good old-fashioned apologies.
Can we get on to an example? There was a case of the Indian doctor, Dr. Gopala, who recently was found guilty by a Supreme Court jury. 2 females on 2 days went to see him, one with a headache and one with stomach cramps. What happened next?
He was found guilty of raping his patients, to put not too fine a point on it.
And that was by a Supreme Court jury?
By the Supreme Court jury. And it is a gross breach of trust. The basis of any relationship between doctors and their patients must be trust. We go to our doctors, we tell them intimate things, we tell them things that we don't want other people to know about. We allow ourselves to be intimately examined. In order to be able to do that, trust is very important. And when a doctor, like Dr. Gopala, does the wrong thing, it has repercussions for the whole of the medical profession.
Nunz, can I ask you this? The fact that he failed to put in his notes that he conducted internal examinations of these 2 women, doesn't that sort of put a bit of suspicion on what he actually did? Of
course. Look, Tony, if you read this article for what it is, it's, to us, it's a disgusting story. And one, he obviously hasn't put in his notes. 2, look, again, we don't want to go into the detail, but, the allegations obviously of digital rape. and the fact that one, he didn't put on the nose, two, offered whether to wear gloves or not, that's just disgusting. And that's why, look, it's great that we've got forums like the Health Service Commission to make sure, not only with the courts, but also to make sure that they can be deregistered if it goes down that path.
That's right.
Beth, the fact that he didn't have it in his notes went to his state of mind, didn't it?
Yes, it probably did, because he was obviously trying to conceal it.
Yes.
What I used to always say to medical students, and I've lectured dozens and dozens of them over the years, I've said, look, if you don't listen to anything else that I say, please listen to these two things. One, never ever bonk your patients. That's never all right. And two, always keep good records.
Nunz, the thing about Dr. Gopal that also heavily weighed against him was the fact that the day he got picked up at the airport, he'd booked a one-way ticket back to India. So that's goes to his state of mind again.
Look, I think it all says that he was a guilty man, Tony.
Beth, there's this very interesting case of a Mr. DeAngelis. Can you tell us a bit about him?
Mr. DeAngelis first came to my attention, probably about 8 years ago now. He was a man who described himself as a shaman. Shamanism actually does have a place particularly in indigenous cultures. They're the healers, basically. Peter DeAngelis always spoke with an American Indian accent. He claimed to be a North American Indian. In fact, to my knowledge, he'd never left Victoria. He was the son of Italians who lived there. Mr. DeAngelis went under the name Thunder Eagle. He passed himself off as a North American Indian healer. He exploited many women who came to him for health services, and he sexually got involved sexually with them as well.
Nunz, this Mr. DeAngelis, or Thunder Eagle, he not only extracted as much money as he could from these ladies, but it was a way of him getting into relationships and satisfying his sexual desires.
Look, it was proven, and the doctor can comment upon that more, that he did have sexual relations with patients or clients, whatever you call it. And we've only read briefly about it, but look, Doctor, you've been in this in a fairly deep way, and I know you publicly named him in Parliament.
Yes,
it's a fairly sensitive subject because, look, he did commit suicide. So, if you could maybe tell the viewers a bit more about it.
Okay. What he would do is he would prey on vulnerable women, sometimes who had cancer, for example, and promise the world they would arrive at his so-called clinic after having fasted for 48 hours. So they're already vulnerable.
Feeling weak and vulnerable.
Yep. Then they would be greeted most warmly and then left alone for several hours. Then he would come back and burn green tobacco, which he forced down into their lungs to get the devils out. He would wrap people in his sweat lodge, which was 5 blankets, so they would be starving, uncomfortably hot, choking. Then there would be pressing on what do they call those points?
Pressure points?
Oh, pressure points.
Yeah, chakra points, they call them in this kind of arena. And then he would be trying to get the serpents out and bring out the beautiful inner woman in the patient.
Well, Beth, viewers, we're going to go to a sponsors break. Stay tuned. After the break, we're going to hear what happened to Mr. DeAngelis / Thunder Eagle. Viewers, welcome back to the show. We're dealing with this very interesting case of Thunder Eagle. Beth, can I ask you this? When you approached DeAngelis and you're investigating him, what did he do?
Well, even while I was investigating Mr. DeAngelis, he kept on taking on new victims. He believed that he was on a mission from wherever and that he could do what he liked and he was above the law. So I took the very unusual step of actually naming him in Parliament.
Okay.
It was a power that I had but had never used before. He's the first person that I ever named publicly under those powers. And that's basically because he kept up his evil ways and he refused to cooperate with our recommendations that he stop. Before I named him, I asked for a psychiatric assessment of him. I didn't want to take the risk of naming someone publicly for the first time.
If he had psychological issues.
If in fact he had a mental illness. The psychiatrist had to decide one of three things. One, was he mentally ill? Two, was it a case of pseudo-logica fantastica? Or three, was he just a crook? And after a very thorough examination by a forensic psychiatrist, a very skilled man, the conclusion was no mental illness, no pseudo-logica fantastica, he was a crook.
What if he was just delusional?
Well, it depends what you mean by just delusional.
I mean, not a crook, but believed in his own powers.
Well, I would say that's exactly the category that he fitted into, but I think it was also a little bit more cunning.
Just quickly, I'm confused because you're saying that he wasn't cooperating throughout this process, but he did undertake the psychological assessment.
Much to my great surprise.
Yeah.
Well,
I think maybe he wanted to prove he wasn't mad.
If he was a health services provider, Nunz, this could have gone to the board, who could have then applied to VCAT to have him deregistered.
If he was a registered health provider.
Yes.
He was providing a health service. The Supreme Court found that because he challenged our jurisdiction, arguing we had no jurisdiction over him because he wasn't a health service provider. The court disagreed with that. So there's registered providers who are like doctors, dentists, nurses,
surgeons,
physiotherapists, all of those. They are registered by the relevant board, and the board sets standards of practice, and if they breach those standards, they can be struck off the register, reprimanded, fined, or made to practice with certain conditions, or go back to school and get some more
So just
education.
all those penalties, though, Doctor, who can make those penalties? The board or is it VCAT?
The board does a preliminary investigation
Yeah,
and
VCAT.
decides that it goes, if they find that there's good reason, it goes to VCAT.
Okay.
Nunzio, tell us what negative licensing is.
Well, negative licence is when a health professional is deregistered, and effectively you want to have powers to say that even when they're not registered, to effectively stop them from still practicing. Because once they're not registered, you lose power over them. Is that
Well,
is
you've
that
got the
correct?
power to jail them, actually, as a negative licence.
That's the proposal. I think in New South Wales
Well, it's
and
like
Adelaide
that in
they
New
do
South
yeah.
Wales, no?
Okay. The problem is that there are a whole lot of people out there who are practicing without any registration and not much oversight. People who are harmed by them can complain to the Health Services Commissioner, but it's very difficult to do anything about them when you don't have the spectre of the registration board to assist you. So you could have a doctor who was struck off for very poor practice, who then sets up a shingle and calls himself a psychoanalyst, for example. What I've proposed, and other people have supported as well, and what in fact has happened in New South Wales, is that we have a negative licensing scheme. You can't register all of these people, but you can set up a code of practice in consultation with the particular health service, and if they breach that code of practice, they can be fined, jailed, all of those other sanctions.
Okay. Nunz, Dr. Null Campbell was a dentist. Tell us a bit of background about him.
Well, this is, I think when the viewers hear this, it'll shock you, just like I'm sure it shocked you, Doctor. But effectively, Mr. Null Campbell was a dentist who was administering, was it?
Ozone gas for the
Yeah.
relief of dental pain.
But obviously anally, if that...
Anally.
Yeah, just to put it bluntly, and just a strange practice for obviously someone going to, just to a dentist. So
Mr. Campbell was always an entrepreneur, and he had some interesting practices happening while he was a dentist. He was a great believer in removing mercury fillings, which is a very invasive thing to do. He was anti-fluoride. And then he got into this interesting process of administering ozone gas. In fact, there was a photograph of him in The Age with a pair of those, those bellows you use for a wood fire?
Yes.
Yeah, with it, on his face with, oh, God.
Doctor, could you explain for the viewers like, did he just come up with this practice on his own accord? Was this something that's been used by some dentists? Look, I wouldn't have a clue, but
Look,
explain that, because I'm sure that's what the viewers are thinking.
There are some uses for oxygen in certain treatments, but Mr. Campbell had a lot of novel treatments, often using inserting things into the rectum, lights, oxygen, whatever. I went and looked at his clinic, and there were all kinds of strange saunas and odd treatments. I saw people there in the last stages of cancer who were really ill. What happened with Mr. Campbell was that the dental board had a complaint against him for this ozone treatment, and so they took action to investigate him with a view to having him struck off the register. He let his registration lapse so that he was no longer a dentist, and argued that the dental board no longer had jurisdiction over him because of that.
He took $35,000 from every Miller's
Yes.
for treatment.
Yeah.
That's the next
How did she
phase.
come up with that sort of money?
Anthony was a lovely man. He served his country in the Defence Forces. He tried a lot of alternative treatments for his cancer to little avail, and then his wife unfortunately heard about Null Campbell and came here to Victoria to be treated. He sold a machine to Anthony Every Miller, which turned out to be an aircraft transmission.
Yeah.
Anthony knew because he was an aeronautical engineer, that was his profession. So it was totally, completely useless. He sold another man in the country a machine for $5,000 that was supposed to cure his lung cancer. The man told me it looked like a vacuum cleaner. It was a vacuum cleaner, Tony, with a pipe attached to it and a pair of headphones. So you put that on, and that's supposed to cure your lung cancer.
No.
So wait, just quickly, Tony. So after he was effectively struck off as a dentist, then he went on to this next phase.
Treating cancer patients.
Isn't that go against the purpose of... where's the regulation? Because he should
You're right.
He shouldn't be practising at all.
No,
in anything.
Nunzio, it's really difficult because once he's no longer under the scrutiny of the dental board, of course he's looking around for ways to make money, and his treatments got more and more novel and unproven and invasive and expensive. So that again is why we need the negative licensing law to deal with
But
people like him to protect the public.
The ACCC could take action against him if he wasn't a registered health provider, couldn't
The
they?
ACCC could take action if he was behaving in a misleading and deceptive manner. ACCC proceedings tend to be quite cumbersome and
Okay.
expensive and sometimes difficult to prove.
Viewers, we've got to go to a sponsors break, so please stay tuned. After the break, we'll come back to this very interesting discussion with Dr. Beth Wilson, who is a doctor at law as opposed to a medical professional. So don't go away. Viewers, welcome back to the show. Before the break, we were talking about this Null Campbell. He finally got struck off, didn't he?
He never got struck off. He let his registration run out so that the board would have no jurisdiction over him. But what happened was Consumer Affairs Victoria took him to the Supreme Court. In first instance, there was a single judge who said that Mr. Campbell was a lovely man who behaved himself so well in court, even though he was unrepresented. And he thought it was consistent with Mr. Campbell's freedom of speech to be able to make the claims that he was making, even if they weren't true, just so long as he believed in them. Judge Carbone used the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to come to that decision. That was appealed and went to the Court of Appeal, which disagreed with the judge in just about every instance and found that Campbell was guilty on 9 counts of misleading and deceitful conduct.
Okay. Nunz, these are very extreme examples that we've been dealing with, and we've got another extreme example of a Dr. Hooper who ended up at Essendon as well.
Yeah, look, Malcolm Hooper has been in the news of late because he's been linked with the Essendon saga and that Mexican, so-called Mexican drug that was administered to the players, which was of a patient. Yeah. And look, he's been able to strive as well. Can you explain a bit to the viewers, Doctor?
Okay, Mr. Hooper was a registered chiropractor, so therefore he came under the jurisdiction of the Chiropractors Board of Australia. Used to be the Chiropractors Board of Victoria, but now, when you're registered as a health practitioner, you're registered nationally. He was approached by a young man called Erjan Tikan, who has cerebral palsy. He's got a lot of abilities, Erjan, but he's also uses an electric wheelchair to get around. Erjan wanted to do something to improve his situation, and he did what a lot of patients do. He went onto the internet. He found out that there's stem cell therapy being offered in Mexico, but was told by the Mexicans that he couldn't have their treatment unless he first had hyperbaric treatment.
Yeah.
He approached Malcolm Hooper for the hyperbaric treatment. He told Malcolm Hooper that he was on a disability services pension and therefore didn't have much money. Mr. Hooper said that he could be a subsidised client, and things went along all right for a while, but eventually he sent a bill to Erjan for about $50,000, I think.
Thank Christ he told him that he couldn't afford it.
Well, that didn't impress Hooper because he pursued the debt vigorously.
Okay.
Even suggesting to Erjan that Erjan's brother should rob a bank to pay him.
It's awful.
Whether it was said in jest or not, I don't know, but it was very, very upsetting to Erjan, who's a man of honour.
Beth, Nunz, a lot of these examples are very extreme. Day to day, Nunzio, they wouldn't be this extreme, you wouldn't think. But there'd be a lot of cases of misdiagnosis, perhaps?
No, look, yeah, I suppose from our end, as a plaintiff law firm, when we get medical negligence inquiries, a lot of them are, again, misdiagnosis, as Tony's mentioned, failure to warn, I suppose lack of post-operative care. They're probably the main queries that we receive.
And Nunzio, under the Wrongs Act, it's not that clear when it comes to suing a doctor, because we had the case of Hooper and Dr. Effie.
Yep.
Now, the reason why we succeeded in that case, or you succeeded, was the fact that she used a procedure that wasn't widely used by her colleagues.
Yeah, it wasn't widely accepted in light of the poor healing that Bronwyn was going to have, and that was proven by obviously medical advice. And Bronwyn went through hell with her post-operative care, and this was some sort of justice for her, but it doesn't put her back to where she was.
And doctor, in that case there, the reason why the plaintiff did win was because when you look at the Wrongs Act, it says that if a doctor follows a procedure that's widely accepted by fellow practitioners in the same discipline, well, if you make a mistake, that doesn't necessarily mean you've been negligent. But in this case, because what she was doing was not widely accepted, the court found against Dr. Effie.
Right, and only on that one count,
yes.
as I understand it.
On the issue of negligence.
What's it's hard, I know you don't want to generalise with the board, but what's the board's attitude, if say a doctor comes to the board, it's been 4 or 5 times. Like I've had some cases where, I've sued a doctor, I've checked on court records and, I think this is their 10th or 12th proceeding against him. Now, what's general? I know you can't generalise, doctor, but what's their attitude and what would be the penalties, ramifications?
Well, obviously, if a doctor is getting multiple complaints against them, you would be deeply concerned about that. And that certainly happened at the commission. I had multiple complaints about a doctor who was doing cosmetic procedures, not a plastic surgeon. She was, in fact, a general practitioner doing these beauty treatments, of which there are hundreds these days and people are spending a lot of money on them. She was having so many complaints that I felt like we were being put in a position where we were actually almost like co-conspirators, because people would complain, I would get redress, compensation in confidential settings for that individual patient, but the poor practice would continue.
Oh, okay.
So in that case, I take it to the board and say, I want you to have a look at this person's conduct because she's a frequent flyer.
Beth, the viewers have to be very conscious of the fact that a lot of people are going overseas, a lot of women are going overseas for breast augmentation, and other procedures, and they're getting substandard treatment in these countries, Nunzio.
Yeah.
Thailand and Malaysia. I'm not saying that they don't have good medical services, but in a lot of instances they're paying a little bit less than what they'd pay in Australia. But when they get back to Australia, the doctors are loath to treat them, aren't they, Doc?
The real problem is infection control following the procedure. Because you're in a foreign country, you're on your own. And if you get a nasty infection, you can be in a lot of trouble.
And Nunzio, the other problem too, talking to the viewers, is that if they've been overseas, had this treatment, it went bad, doctors are loath to treat them because they're scared of getting sued themselves, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Look, you'd almost refer them on to somebody else because you don't want to, you know already that you're sort of walking into trouble, and you're on
the back foot, aren't you?
Yeah, and it's sad for the client or the patient because they do need treatment, and
Most surgeons would not turn someone away who desperately needed their help. But it does expose them to risk because doing repair work after botched surgery is not easy.
It's a lot harder.
If a doctor goes before the board and there's findings, are you obliged to notify the medical insurer?
The insurers are always involved where there's a complaint about a doctor, dentist or other registered practitioner. And for the most part, they have cooperated quite well with the Commission over the years. The Wrongs Act had made my life a lot more difficult because as the threshold went up and it became more difficult for people to succeed in medical negligence, the insurers became less likely to cooperate.
Well, you needed a permanent injury, that's the problem.
And of a certain percentage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nunzio, is there anything we want to say to the public, because we've come to the end of the show?
Yeah, look, just quickly, we were talking about this offset. Tony was saying that sometimes Health Service Commission's got a view of, I hate to say it, looking after the doctors, whereas some look at the other way. What's your take on all that?
During my 15 years as Commissioner, I was accused by an equal number of people, by consumers of preferring health service providers and by health service providers of preferring
So you can't win.
consumers.
So it's 6 or 1.5 dozen of the
either
other.
I did everything wrong or
You can't
maybe
win.
got it right.
Look,
Beth, where does your future take you? You're out of the post as of when?
Yeah. I finished up on December the 31st this year, or at the end of last year. We're still waiting for a new commissioner to be appointed, which is a bit disappointing.
Sounds like a tough position.
Well, it's an interesting job and there's plenty of really good people who can do it.
Okay. Look, I wish you all the very best of luck in the future, and obviously we'll try and get you back on the show to do, because it's a very interesting subject for the viewers.
Yeah.
Nunzio?
Look, Tony, tonight's episode has brought to light that unfortunately there's a lot of people that suffer because of a medical negligence matter. So look, if you do, please seek the advice of a lawyer, and we can help you.
Thanks for coming on board, Beth. Thanks for coming on board. We'll get you back in the future. Viewers, thanks for watching the show. Go to our Twitter and also Facebook. Go to past episodes. Stay tuned for future episodes. And always remember to stay safe.